talk about the format, because we've spoken about this quite a few times in the previous months, particularly with you, Miguel, and I know you've written about this in The Independent. You've used the headline, Jose Mourinho's magic moment brings needed drama to otherwise predictable Champions League event. We saw such drama in the Champions League, and it was so exciting, and I think this is probably what UEFA were hoping for throughout the previous 7 weeks, but we didn't really see that. How do you make of the format and the fact that it all comes down to that final week of excitement? Does that make up for perhaps the suggestions of fan disengagement the previous 7 weeks?
Well, I mean, you mentioned there about UEFA hoping for that. I think they sort of need it a little bit. Because, I mean, look, obviously the whole point of this, the point of this last night is it's a television event, and there's a bigger discussion to get into there about the direction the football is taking and what it wants to be and all this sort of thing. But I mean, part of that television event and part of what actually made the Benfica moment, because I kept thinking this through the night, I have to say, with every goal that went in, and there were a lot of them, and it was entertaining and it was fun, it was always going to be because the way it was constructed. But almost like with every goal we went in, you had to figure out, okay, what does that mean? And by the time you'd figured it out, because there was like 3 other goals elsewhere, that it changed the stakes anyway, which is a bit of a flaw in it. Whereas the thing about this Benfica goal was you didn't have to look anywhere else. I mean, you couldn't look anywhere else, and especially with Mourinho there. But it was immediately clear. The jeopardy was clear. The stakes were clear. And also, crucially, it was about sudden death elimination. Either Benfica were in or they were out. Because the rest of it, and this is becoming an issue with the way football is going. And you can even look at it with the expansion of the World Cup. A lot of the rest of it feels like kind of like fake half stakes. I mean, like I heard the phrase last night a lot, like, oh, Real Madrid are now out. Paris Saint-Germain are out. Yeah, out into the playoffs. They've got a safety net. And like, okay, yes, it matters a little bit, but not really. And I mean, there's also a considerable irony to the fact that one of the quote-unquote prizes for finishing top 8 is that you get to avoid 2 matches, when the entire point of this expanded Champions League, it's basically a Super League by stealth. The entire point of it is so the big clubs get more games. And here they are trying to avoid them because of the effect in their season. And so I generally, despite last night, I don't think the final night, which is always going to be fun, I don't think it justifies months of where kind of like half stakes, nothing football. And like from people I've been speaking to at Premier League clubs and clubs in Europe, there's a similar feeling. Not all clubs. I mean, like say Bodo, Saint-Gilloise, they obviously had great moments. They were great stories. But for a lot of the kind of the bigger clubs, there's a feeling that they're going through the motions of the Champions League. I mean, with the Premier League clubs, they don't think it's at this stage. The knockouts will obviously be different, but they don't think the group stage is anywhere near as psychologically or tactically as demanding as the Premier League games. And you can see it with Spurs. I mean, Spurs, they struggle they lose to West Ham, fail to beat Burnley, and yet they're finishing ahead of the last 3 champions of the competition: Real Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain, and City. So I don't really think it works. It feels like a lot of football and football content for the sake of it, when the whole point of the Champions League, at least that what I associate with it growing up, is high stakes, and that applied to the group stage. I mean, it's an obvious reference now, but I mean, remember the Man United games in the 90s against Juventus, this sort of thing, or even Arsenal going into the early 2000s. These were massive events early in the competition. That's what Europe should be about, not what this has been. I don't like the format.
Yeah, that is very clear, Miguel. Jonathan, I really want to get your thoughts on this. Miguel used the term Super League by stealth. Is that your view on it?
I mean, certainly this is why it's happened. Extra games, a sop to the big clubs, bigger revenues, and more product to sell to the television companies, and less context. 36 is just too many teams to put in a league. I'm sure a lot of your viewers wouldn't have bothered looking at the table for a lot of it, because it just makes no sense. Just like lots of, only 3 points separating the middle 19 teams there. It's hard to get a handle on. In a way, this is the point. I mean, because it's sports reduced or elevated, according to your perspective, to the level of a TV game show. There is a real kind of confected jeopardy towards the end of it. UEFA will obviously say the end justifies the means. Like, goalkeeper scoring in the 94th minute, brilliant scenes, great content. But does it make sense? Does it make sense to most people who follow sport because there is a narrative and because they understand the stakes? I don't think so. I think it's basically like, it's like a reality TV. It's like The Traitors, basically, where, you've got 55 minutes of them chatting about who looked at who funny, and then in the end, someone gets murdered. Marseille get murdered. Move next episode.
Okay. Miguel, so what's the answer here then? You don't like the format. Jonathan certainly doesn't like the format. You just want to go back to how it was, or have you thought of a new creative format, perhaps?
You'd have to go back about 30 years. Look, at this level, football has more issues. I mean, one of the reasons they've had to do this was basically because of the Super League clubs. Because of the prize money for the Champions League and the commercial opportunities, about 12 to 15 clubs grew to this super size that meant they were kind of dominating everything. And you can see it in who wins the Champions League. Hence, they felt they should have a breakaway. So really, UEFA have to address that, or football has to address that. They're unlikely to do it. I'm not sure they feel they can do it. There are other potential solutions. I think a good one is that obviously you can't recreate the old foreign player rule, which created a spread of talent around Europe because of EU laws. But you can go in another direction and suggest, say, every team in Europe has to play 3 homegrown players in every starting 11. That actually starts to have a massive effect on things like this. In the context we're in, without these sort of bigger changes, I'd like to see straight knockout from the start. You've got immediate jeopardy for that. The Champions League will feel different once it's straight knockout. I think it's the best solution. But of course, clubs like Real Madrid and a lot of the English clubs, they're not going to accept a situation. I mean, this is why we have the Champions League in the first place. They don't want a situation where they play 2 games in September, they're out, and that's the European season done with, tens of millions gone. But that would be my preference in this context if you're not going to introduce my plans for Das Kapital football.
Okay. UEFA, are you listening? Miguel Delaney there with an idea for a different format.